Good evening and welcome everybody to the Penshurst Street and High Street local community briefing for Willoughby Council's new draft LEP and DCP. My name is Norma Shanky-Williams, and on behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. So before we get into the business of the webinar tonight, we always think it's a very useful overview to explain the rationale for the new draft LEP and DCP. So we'll show a short video now featuring Mayor Taylor and Dr. Deborah Deering from the GSC, and I cue the video.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the local environment plan.
The local environment plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the local environment plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The local environment plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage, as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So hopefully you found that a useful introduction and background to the LEP and DCP. I think it always sets a good scene for the webinars. So as I said, my name is Norma Shanky-Williams. I head up the strategic planning team here in Council. I'll be joined tonight in part of the webinar presentation by Nicola Grosskops, a colleague from the North Sydney Local Health District. Also, Chris Newen will talk about the detail around Penshurst Street and High Street later on. He's a member of the strategic planning team. And Ian Arnott, the planning manager, will talk about more general aspects of the LEP and DCP as they are proposed in the current exhibited material. You'll notice as we go through the webinar tonight that there are common slides to all webinars. So if you've seen a webinar already, you'll recognize many of these slides. We provide those for consistency and context to make sure that you understand that we're giving this the common message in all webinars. The important message from the North Sydney Local Health District is about building healthy built environments, and that is an element of the agenda tonight, which we find very useful. A welcome to councillors in attendance. Tonight we have the Mayor Taylor, who is in attendance, and Councillor McCullough. So welcome to both of you this evening on the Zoom call tonight. We have 73 people registered for tonight's webinar, and thus far there's nobody in the chamber. So that goes, I think that's testament to the success of webinars, that you can actually enjoy and experience them in your own home and get as much information probably from home as you would if you came into the chamber. So there's nobody here with us tonight, but we have got a number who are tuned into the webinar online. If you have any questions, if you can submit those at any time in the Q&A function on the Zoom call, and we will either try and answer them tonight, or if we don't get to them, we will certainly provide a response within a couple of weeks so that you can see what the answers are. And staff will provide those answers if they are straightforward, as I say, or within 10 days on Have Your Say. And we'll try and take some questions at the end of the webinar tonight. It's being recorded and it'll be available on Have Your Say by tomorrow. So you can revisit it tomorrow if you choose, and you can dwell on some of the detail that you may not have captured already tonight. If you've got any comments that are not questions, if you can put those in the chat area of the Zoom, that would be very helpful. So the agenda tonight, I'll provide some strategic planning background to how we've got to the point we're at on exhibition with the draft LEP and DCP. I'll talk about some changes the state government has brought forward and is currently bringing forward. Then we'll hear from the Northern Sydney Local Health District, as I said, about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby, and that's Nicola Grosskopf tonight. And then we'll have some detail around this particular couple of local centres, Penshurst Street and High Street, from Chris Newen. He'll talk through those proposed controls that we've got in the draft documents. And then Ian will talk about the draft LEP and DCP more generally in terms of our residential zones more widely around these local centres. And then we'll have time for questions and hopefully wrap up promptly at 7:30. So some of the headline changes that are contained in these documents on exhibition, one of them, the main one, is about growing Chatswood CBD to the north and south along the rail corridor. And that's in line with the CBD strategy that many of you will be familiar with. So that shows growth in heights and FSRs in an aim to increase the employment offering in Chatswood, as well as the residential offering in and around the CBD. We're also increasing density in our local centres and proposing, such as in Penshurst Street, proposing growth that's commensurate with the scale of those local centres in line with our local centres strategy, which was adopted by council after much community consultation. We're also proposing more height and density in our industrial areas in line with the industrial land strategy that we prepared. And that hopefully will inspire some innovation and inspire some revitalisation of our industrial areas, which are very important areas for us in Willoughby. They're scarce lands now on the lower North Shore, so we protect them very closely. We also have other headline changes to do with design excellence. A new design excellence requirement will be introduced and is proposed to be introduced, and an increase in our affordable housing requirement from 4% to 10%. In line with some feasibility work we had done in order to bring this new control into play, and controls around managing urban heat impacts, which are the result of our changing and warming climate. We're also proposing to align our residential controls with the exempt and complying code SEP, that's the state government's state environmental planning policy, so that we can achieve more equity in terms of the built outcomes in our local area, while still at the same time making sure that our landscaping controls are as strong as they can be. And for that reason, we're elevating them from the DCP to the LEP and giving them more power in that statutory instrument, the LEP. That's our proposal to make sure that we don't lose the important characterisation of Willoughby, which is a green and leafy suburb, important not just for character, but also for biodiversity and also protection from heat impacts too. So they're all underpinned by sound rationale. In the development control plan, we have got our existing strong heritage controls, which we are strengthening further with more detail around different aspects of heritage control. And also reducing car parking requirements is another proposal in the development control plan, particularly around railway precincts, where there is good high accessibility to rail and for Chatswood and Artarmon bus travel too. And all the documentation is on exhibition for 12 weeks, which we hope will prove to be a sufficient time for you to understand and explore the changes we're proposing and formulate submissions to make suggestions of how they could be improved or amended, or whatever you think is an important aspect that you want to make heard during this exhibition period. In terms of the process of how we've got to where we are now on exhibition, of course, the work we've done has been underpinned by that good strategic planning work we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, in particular to do with the CBD strategy, our housing strategy, the local centres strategy, industrial lands, and our integrated transport strategy, and the work we've undertaken with the other councils around St Leonard's Crow's Nest with state government in terms of the St Leonard's Crow's Nest 2036 plan. And of course, we've been informed in our LEP and DCP work by the North District Plan, which was issued by the GSC, now the GCC, and that has guided the work we've been doing. All councils had to prepare a local strategic planning statement, and we adopted ours in 2020. And that has been the blueprint, effectively drawing down the aims and objectives from the North District Plan and our other strategic planning documents into a single local strategic planning statement guiding the work on our LEP and DCP. And thus we prepared the draft LEP called a planning proposal and put that to the local planning panel for advice. It was supported by the Willoughby local planning panel, and we reported to council, who also supported it, for referral to the Department of Planning and Environment for a gateway determination, as it's called. The gateway determination was granted on Christmas Eve last year, and it had certain requirements that council had to fulfill before we could go on exhibition. So we managed to satisfy those gateway requirements, and here we are now on exhibition with those draft documents. So it's been quite a long journey to get to this point. And you will find that much of the, if not all the content of this draft LEP and DCP reflects the earlier work we did in our local strategic planning work. The current LEP, the Willoughby LEP 2012, started work in 2006 and was exhibited a couple of times in 2010 and then in 2012. And it may be something that we'll have to consider for this draft LEP if there are changes that we need to re-exhibit. That may be something we'll have to turn to. It came into force in 2013, so it's now 9 years old, and it's already had not 21, but now 23 amendments since gazettal. So it's clearly is ripe for refreshment. And moreover, because we now have a North District Plan and a Greater Sydney Commission delivering those district plans with new aims and objectives that local councils must adhere to and deliver on, we are now required to refresh and renew our local environmental plan in the context of that North District Plan. And that's something that we have done in consultation with the GCC. I also mentioned that we had to deliver a local strategic planning statement, which we did in 2020, following the issue of those district plans. And this sets the 20-year vision with priorities and actions for the whole LGA. It's a very comprehensive document itself, and the comprehensive LEP tries to give statutory effect to the LSPS actions through implementing planning controls in local strategies prepared by council. And those controls need to cover and influence areas as diverse as housing, health and livability, economy and employment, waterways, climate change, resilience, social infrastructure and collaboration. So you can be the judge as to whether we've made a good fist of delivering and translating the LSPS into our draft statutory LEP now and our DCP, or whether you think there's work still to be done. And that's something we're looking for in submissions we encourage you to make. So as I say, the basis for the new LEP has been drawn from conclusions and recommendations in our existing strategies, delivered through extensive community consultation since 2017. And we have now got those strategies in place, which has been fodder for the LEP and DCP. They are the local centre strategy, the CBD strategy, industrial lands, crow's nest, housing and integrated transport strategies. Moreover, the new draft LEP will assist in responding to the new Resilient Willoughby Strategy and Action Plan from 2021. This is a very important document for Council and for all of us who live within Willoughby Council area. It tries to, the Resilient Willoughby Strategy strives to deliver resilient places to withstand climate change and sustain biodiversity and support vibrant connected communities, and also deliver resilient buildings which are safe, well-designed, affordable and sustainable. And to do those two major undertakings, we have to make sure that the controls and provisions in our draft LEP and DCP will enhance that and deliver on that and provide the mechanism for achieving that resilient Willoughby. So we're very keen to see whether you think indeed we have managed to translate into the LEP and DCP sufficiently the ambitions of the new Resilient Willoughby strategy. Some key statistics that we have in mind when we're doing our strategic planning work in terms of population, housing and jobs growth. Although many have queried the statistics because of the COVID pandemic and the drop in migration and so on, as Deborah Deering said in the introductory video, there has been an impact by COVID on growth, but Sydney will continue to grow and Willoughby will continue to grow. And we're expecting our population to grow to almost 92,000 by 2036. And the number of dwellings in order to meet that population need is expected to grow by over 6,700 to 2036. Our 5-year dwelling target of 1250, which was given in the North District Plan when it was first issued, has now been met. And so we're moving on to a much broader target that takes us to the 2036 planning horizon. So we can know what our job is overall in order to plan properly through our housing strategy. The number of jobs is also expected to increase in Willoughby City as it must in line with the increasing population to 74,600 in 2036, with a specific jobs target for Chatswood CBD that we're determined to achieve, if not exceed, through the containment of residential development in our commercial core and making sure that commercial and employment is the main objective of our planning in in Chatswood CBD. So that's why our Chatswood CBD is such an important document for achieving our employment targets. While we've been doing our own local strategic planning, the state government has been doing all sorts of changes to the state planning framework. One of those is state changes to environmental zones. And this is a change that has already occurred. They've changed the name effectively from environmental zones to conservation zones. And these are now reflected in our LEP. So you will see that name change, and effectively that's all that's happened. But that change has been in order to facilitate changes to employment zones. They've become the E zones by consolidating IN and B zones, industrial and business zones, into new E zones under a new order that we are currently exhibiting with our draft LEP and DCP at the moment to show you how the transition is being made from those current zones to the new zones that are proposed, which will involve some change in uses that are permissible or not within those zones. So we invite you to look at those transitional changes as well, which are also on exhibition, to make sure that we get the right response to the state initiative. So now I'll hand over to Nicola Grosskops, who will talk about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby.
Thanks, Norma, and good evening, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight online. My name is Nicola Grosskops, and I'm a public health professional from the Healthy Built Environments team at Northern Sydney Local Health District, which is a part of New South Wales Health. And we work across the 9 local government areas in Sydney's north, one of which is Willoughby City Council. The Healthy Built Environments program exists to help improve people's health and well-being in Northern Sydney by creating healthier environments, ones which support people to be healthy as a part of everyday living. The broad banner under which we operate, known as population health, focuses on the conditions that enable people and our communities at a population level to remain healthy and out of hospital. So as we meet here tonight to discuss two important documents that will shape Willoughby and the lives of those who live and work here for many years to come, I thank Council for inviting us to talk about the important connection between the built environment and our health. Now, by way of background, when I refer to the built environment, what I mean is the human-made spaces in which we live, work and play on a daily basis. So our homes, buildings, streets, sidewalks, transport corridors, and so on. In this short presentation, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the connection between the built environment and our health in order to set the context for tonight's webinar and discussion about the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP. So 2 questions for you to think about now and as we move through the presentation tonight. And the first one's quite a simple one. What makes you feel healthy? And I invite you to use the chat function and type in and have let us know your answers to these questions and discuss them as we go along tonight. And secondly, firstly, we're under what makes you feel healthy. It could be some form of physical activity. Maybe it's eating healthy food, or is it time spent socializing with friends and family? Maybe for you, it's connecting with nature or spirituality, or it could be a combination of all these things. And if someone could bring up the chat function, that would be great. I can make any comments as well. And secondly, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? And someone's put in meeting people, counsellor, put in meeting people. Yeah, definitely people's social connection is so important for mental well-being and mental health. Well, what we know is that all built environments are not created equal, and the environments in which we live have a profound impact on both our physical and mental health. And healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy, active lifestyle choices the easier choice. So an excellent resource that summarises the many ways in which the built environment interacts with our health is the New South Wales Healthy Built Environment Checklist that's up there on the screen. And the checklist is based on 11 themes. These are healthy eating, physical activity, housing, transport and connectivity, quality employment, community safety and security, open space and natural features, social interaction, social connection and connectivity, the environment and health, and finally environmental sustainability and climate change. Now, what ties all these themes together is the concept of healthy neighbourhood design. And healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions, as informed by documents like the LEP and DCP that we're hearing from tonight, that prioritise complete, compact and connected communities. Communities that reflect these 3 qualities support both recreational and physical activity along safe, well-connected tree-lined streets and paths. They also facilitate planned and incidental social interaction as people have greater opportunities to meet at easily accessible destinations like local shops and centres and areas of green open space. And healthy neighbourhood design also supports business activity and a strong local economy. And they connect people with key services such as public transport when they do need to travel beyond their local neighbourhood for work or leisure. And someone in the chat has put public transport connections at a walkable distance to home are important to them. And that's exactly right. So this diagram captures these features of a healthy neighbourhood. And you can see a healthy neighbourhood designed around a connected and walkable street network, linking to key destinations that are also co-located. So for example, a primary school positioned next to a community centre or library, as well as nearby retail. And what this does is it reduces the reliance on the motor vehicle for short trips, which in turn reduces local traffic congestion, promotes healthier and more sustainable forms of transport like walking and cycling, and encourages people to spend time and build a stronger sense of community and place. So there you have an example of how zoning and development controls can facilitate complete, compact and connected communities, and the ways in which these communities promote our physical and mental health by encouraging physical activity, opportunities for social connection, and access to healthy food at local shops. Now, a central focus of the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP is housing. And from a health perspective, the research evidence is clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are typically characterised by a diversity of housing types, with more compact housing, such as apartments and townhouses located in and near centres, such as the example seen here, and in many areas of Willoughby City Council in and around the Chatswood CBD. And the word density can sometimes concern people, but what we know is that higher density housing that is well designed and well located has an important role to play in accommodating future population growth and providing people with more affordable housing options. We know that housing is a fundamental health need, and a diversity of housing types contributes to a diverse community, one in which people of all ages can live and grow together over time. Thankfully, through appropriate zoning and best practice development controls, much of our higher density housing is setting a new benchmark for design by incorporating green roofs and walls, such as you can see in the picture, as well as measures to activate streetscapes and minimise potential negative outcomes, such as overshadowing of public space. But with all this said, as our city becomes more compact, we have to invest in not just the quantity, but the quality of our public domain, which includes open space. Access to quality open space within walking distance to where people live and work is associated with a range of positive health outcomes. For example, time spent in green space reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, premature death, preterm birth, stress and high blood pressure. And of course, green and natural vegetation contributes to a healthy planet. And that leads me to our final theme of this presentation this evening, environmental sustainability and climate change. These interrelated themes are both major public health issues, and we can design our neighbourhoods in ways that protect our valuable natural habitats, use natural tree shade and design quality built shade to mitigate against urban heat, and future-proof our communities against natural hazards and disasters like floods, bushfires and heat waves. In 2020, more people died from heat than car accidents, and heat-related deaths in New South Wales account for more deaths than all other natural disasters combined. Some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, the elderly, children and people suffering from chronic disease, are the most at risk of heat-related illness and death. So I hope that this presentation has just given you some insights into how our environment shapes our lifestyles and therefore our health and well-being. The Health and Environment Checklist resource is available on the New South Wales Ministry of Health website if you're interested. But I will leave you with those two questions from the beginning of the presentation. What makes you feel healthy? And importantly, how will the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your community's health and wellbeing over the next 15 to 20 years? Thank you, Norma.
Thanks so much, Nicola. I always think that's a very valuable part of the webinar, because what are we doing if not to create healthy built environments in the work we're doing with the LEP and DCP? And now to introduce some particular detail around the Penshurst Street and High Street local centres, I'm going to invite Chris Newen to the microphone to talk us through the details on exhibition.
Hi everyone, my name is Christopher Newen and I'm a strategic planner at Willough Council. Today I'm here to talk to you about the Penshurst Street Local Centre, which is between Laurel Street and Mowbray Road, and also includes a small amount of commercial areas along Mowbray Road. So a few years ago, the council conducted and exhibited a strategy called the Willoughby Local Centre Strategy to 2036 to gain an understanding of housing requirements for the local government area, where we can locate additional housing within the local government area to provide housing and different type of housing for the community, but also understand whether if we could improve our local centres and whether there was scope for local centres to provide additional housing for the community, as well as revise commercial floor space for those local centres. The goals of the local centre strategy for Penshurst Street in particular include retaining the zoning as it is. So on the western side of Penshurst Street, the properties are zoned B5 business development, whilst on the eastern side of Penshurst Street, there is a B2 local centre zoned site, as well as sites that are zoned R3 medium density residential. On the next slide, I will be showing you the proposed changes to the LEP and DCP, which will result in, proposes increases in heights for Penshurst Street and Mowbray Road. And we also seek to upgrade and improve the pedestrian environment for the local centre. So on this slide, as you can see, is the Penshurst Street Local Centre. On the west currently is a row of shop top housing, which ranges from 2-storey, 3 and up to 4-storey. On the eastern side is further shop top housing further towards the north, but there's also a row of single dwellings as well as open space towards the middle of Penshurst Street. So on the western side, which currently contains the shop top housing, we are proposing a change of height limit and floor space ratio. So we're changing the height limit that currently exists from 11 metres to 14 metres, and an FSR of 1.5 to 1 to 2 to 1 to facilitate 4-storey shop top housing for the western side of Penshurst Street. On the eastern side, between 63 to 83 Penshurst Street, which is towards the north of Penshurst Street, we are increasing the height limit from 11 metres to 17 metres, as well as the FSR from 1.5 to 1 to 2.8 to 1 to facilitate 5-storey shop top housing. Where the houses currently exist on the eastern side of Penshurst Street, the existing FSR is 1.5 to 1 and a maximum height limit of 12 metres. So theoretically, if someone was to acquire those sites, they could build a residential flat building. We're increasing the FSR for those sites where those single dwellings currently sit from 1.5 to 1 to 2.1 to 1 to facilitate a residential flat building of up to 4 stories. As you can see on the bottom left-hand corner are properties on the corners of Penshurst Street and Mowbray Road. If you can see on the screen, they're labeled with a number 3. We're increasing the height limit for those 2 specific areas on the corners to change the height from 11 meters to 20 meters, and for the FSR to increase from 1.5 to 1 to 2.8 to 1 to facilitate a 6-story shop-top housing development for those corner sites. I just also like to highlight that this is a conceptual drawing. So this is to guide development in the Penshurst Street Local Centre. It's not indicative of what we're enforcing. That type of detail would be subject to a development application if these controls were to be adopted. I'd also like to highlight that this conceptual plan does not indicate the heritage item Laurel Bank. We're not changing the controls for that particular site because we're protecting and hoping to maintain that as a heritage item. So those are the proposed changes for the height limits and the floor space ratio to facilitate additional housing for the local centre. We do believe it's a modest increase to the local centre when considering the Willoughby local centre strategy was a 20-year plan to 2036. The conceptual plan also indicates an extension of Medway Lane so that it connects to Penshurst Street to provide a vehicle servicing for whatever future development may occur on the site. So that's a summary of the conceptual plan, and you can find that in the proposed Willoughby Development Control Plan. So this is just another conceptual drawing, which is also in the Willoughby Development Control Plan. The details that I just discussed are also shown there. So in regards to zoning for Penshurst Street, we're not changing the existing zoning. We're still maintaining the existing B5 commercial zoning for the western side of Penshurst Street, as well as the lower B2 local centre for the portion of the commercial shops that are to the north of Penshurst Street. The R3 zone, which I mentioned previously, which currently contains single dwellings, that does have the ability for a residential flat building to be constructed there, as well as the properties, the commercial properties along Mowbray Road, which are also zoned B5. So this is just a summary of what I've already discussed. These slides will be made available on Council's websites. It gives a good summary of the proposed changes to the maximum height limits and maximum FSR limits for each of the locations within the Penshurst local centre. So the reasons for the Penshurst local street master plan was to provide a development that is suitable, that would maintain surrounding heritage items and be sympathetic to those items, such as the Laurel Bank House, as well as the school that's adjacent to the centre, but to also provide more suitable housing to 2036 that's in a form and scale that's appropriate for the local centre. We're hoping that future development would transform the local centre to provide a higher level of amenity and also improve walkability throughout the local centre along Penshurst Street as well as Mowbray Road. So within the Willoughby Local Environmental Plan, the Penshurst Street Local Centre is subject to an affordable housing requirement of 4%. We did do an affordable housing study to see whether we could increase the affordable housing amount. But due to feasibility studies, 4% was the adopted level. When you consider that there's already existing 2-, 3-, 4-story development along Penshurst Street. So within the Willoughby Local Environmental Plan, the Penshurst Street Local Centre is included in what we label as Area 3, which requires affordable housing to be provided for redevelopment in the local centre. So within the Willoughby Local Environmental Plan, there is a design excellence clause. This clause applies to development that is 12 metres and over. So any redevelopment that's 4 stories or over 12 metres would be subject to a design excellence review panel that council would create if a development application was lodged. And the panel would consist of expert jury panel members, such as those who are recognised professionals in the field of architecture, urban design, planning, to help get the best design outcomes for this local centre, because we really want to achieve great design outcomes for not just Penshurst Street, but all our local centres across the Willoughby LGA. I'm also here today to talk to you about the High Street Local Centre. As you can see there's the outline of the local centre. It's a very small local centre within the local government area, which currently has 2-storey chop-top housing. So based on the Willoughby Local Centre strategy to 2036, we've concluded that there shouldn't be really any major centres to this local centre when you consider its size, and it doesn't really have capacity to provide additional residential or commercial floor space that would have a meaningful contribution to our targets and our responsibility to provide housing for the community. So what currently exists and what we're maintaining is that you can actually still do a 3-storey development there. However, as there's a 2-storey development there already, that may not be feasible for those current landowners, but the current controls do allow for that to occur. We're maintaining the existing floor space ratio for the local centre to 1.3 to 1, and we're maintaining the rear lane parking and laneway access. We're hoping to maintain the mature trees that currently exist for that local centre, and we're trying to improve pedestrian amenity for that local centre. So this is the conceptual master plan for the High Street Local Centre that will be included in the Willoughby Development Control Plan. As I've previously mentioned, there's not much proposed change for this local centre. We are considering whether pedestrian crossings would be something that would be suitable for High Street in order to improve safety as well as the amenity for this local centre. So that's indicated as number 4 on the slide, if you can see that. But besides that, there are no major changes with regards to things such as bulk and scale or indicative bulk and scale for the future of the High Street Centre. What we are changing though is the zoning for the school. It's currently zoned as R2 low density residential, but the more appropriate zoning for an educational establishment is its own zoning, SP2 educational establishment. So we're proposing that change for the lot where the school exists, but there's no changing in zoning for the local centre or the immediate surrounding area. So this is just the conceptual drawing for the High Street, where we're really maintaining the build form that you can currently do for the local centre. And we're hoping to maintain the rear parking and laneway access for the centre. Other general improvements that we seek to make with the exhibition of the local environmental plan, including errors, removing obsolete clauses that no longer apply to certain areas. But one of the key changes is the introduction of an urban heat clause, where any redevelopment would be required to provide evidence to show that it's having an acceptable impact on urban heat. As the previous speaker mentioned, there's quite a large impact in urban heat that has significant impacts on health, and an urban heat clause seeks to ensure that development has acceptable temperature impacts for occupants within those new buildings, as well as for the immediate surrounding area. Other Other changes to the LEP involve just correcting anomalies. So the example in this slide is that there's a heritage item within this site, and only a portion of that heritage item is listed as a heritage item, but the entire lot is meant to be indicated as a heritage item. So these are the type of corrections that we're making as well with the exhibition of the LEP. So the conceptual plans that you saw today for Penshurst Street and High Street can be found in Part L of the Willoughby Development Control Plan. So if you are hoping to make a submission and are looking through the documents for the Willoughby Development Control Plan and would like to see the conceptual plans, as well as the proposed height changes and floor space ratio changes that I've discussed today, they can be viewed in Part L of the Willoughby Development Control Plan that's on exhibition on Council's website. I'm now going to pass you over to Ian Arnott, who will be discussing the Willoughby Local Environmental Plan and how it'll have impacts for the Willoughby local government area. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Chris. And thank you everyone for your attendance tonight. It's great to see the community involved in this important work. Apologies, I'm needing to present from home tonight. As was mentioned, my main focus tonight is on housing and primarily outside of the local centres, the areas that make up the majority of our suburbs. And just in that respect, it is really drawing on the housing strategy that Council endorsed in 2020, in which we had three main focus areas for provision of new housing in our area, or increasing the density to provide for that 6,700 new dwellings that we estimate will be needed to provide for the growing population. Those three focus areas are around the Chatswood CBD, being an area of greatest accessibility to transport and services, and that will take up what we see as the bulk of that, those additional dwellings. Also the local centres. However, in this instance, not the High Street Centre. There will be the potential, as Chris mentioned, to provide under the existing controls some additional housing if a landowner chooses to, but we're not proposing to increase the density in the High Street Centre, but we are for part, as Chris has referred to, for the Penshurst Street Centre. And then the third focus area for increased housing is in our existing residential flat zones where they haven't already been taken up for additional housing, looking to see how that might be achieved. And the main reasons that we're focusing on those areas is to protect our low density areas, the character that so much of the Willoughby local government area demonstrates, that garden character, the landscape, streetscapes and garden forms, and to, rather than spread higher densities out through those areas, to retain those lower density dwelling house areas. Also provides for that diversity of accommodation, housing type. So not only high rise, medium density development, townhouse forms, but also to provide that low density single dwelling house throughout the area. And also, as I've mentioned, to provide the most increase in densities in those areas most accessible to transport and services. Can someone just click over? Thank you. So the main changes in respect to housing in the draft local environmental plan relate to, as Norma had mentioned, aligning to the state government policy on exempt and complying development. And that has introduced the ability to have single dwelling houses in our low density R2 zones, not in heritage conservation areas and not in those C4 environmental living zones, but in the the R2 zones, it enables single dwelling houses to 2 stories to be done without any reference to council as what's called complying development. So it may be done as through a private certifier and goes through a process of really a ticker box, demonstrating that it satisfies numerical standards and there is no merit assessment to those applications. So in those instances where a single dwelling house can be approved on one site under that process, but on the site next door, if it doesn't comply with one of those small elements, is restricted much further in the extent of development that it can achieve, much smaller floor space ratio, more stringent setbacks, etc. It seems to be inequitable. And so we're seeking to provide greater equity between what is allowed under the state government policies and our own. There is one significant exception to that, however, and that has to do with our landscaping control. As I mentioned earlier, we see the importance of the character and amenity that the gardens provide to our area. Also the importance of the green landscaping to the resilience of our city, to provide for that biodiversity and that to address the urban heat effects. So we propose to retain generally our landscaping controls, which are more stringent than the code CEP controls, but also to strengthen them by moving them from the development control plan into the local environmental plan. And we're doing similar with our dual occupancy provisions. So again, aligning with the code CEP, which now allows dual occupancy also to be done by a complying development certificate as of the middle of last year. And but still strengthening the landscape controls and ensuring more stringent landscaping controls within the local environmental plan. The state government policies also have provisions for what are called manor houses, being up to 4 dwellings over 2 stories. And if council doesn't have a minimum lot size for those, they're allowed on sites of a minimum of 600 square metres, sorry. We see, and that applies to our residential flat zone, R3 zone. We see that if that is allowed, we're not actually achieving the dwelling targets that we see as necessary, that it is, if you like, undercooking our residential flat zones, and also potentially produces a form of development that has less amenity, with dwellings looking directly into each other with minimal setbacks, etc. So for that reason, we have proposed to align the minimum lot size for manor houses to 1,100 square metres, consistent with what we require for other residential flat development. And that would then apply for any complying development as well. Also, in accordance with our community strategic plan, we're looking at increasing the affordable housing provision from 4% to 10%. I'll talk about all of these things in a little bit further detail as we go. So next slide, please. So just to have a look at the dwelling house approvals, so a couple of examples that have come about. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see 2 dwellings that have been approved under the complying development process, and on the right-hand side under the DA process. And it's evident that, at least from a streetscape point of view, the scale and streetscape presentation of these dwellings is not dissimilar. Next slide. Now this looks a bit detailed, and I just wanted to show it to you because it is important to these changes and how to understand them. So on the left-hand table, this is our current way of calculating floor space for dwelling houses. If you go down to the line that says 301 to 400 square metre site area, you can see that for a 400 square metre site area, under our current controls, 200 square metres of floor space is achievable. If you go to the next line down, 401 square metres site area, the amount of floor space you can achieve drops down. That's because of the way the table is set up as a floor space ratio control and in bands based on site area. And that seems to be inequitable, that if you have a larger site area, you're getting less floor space. Under the complying development controls, a gross floor area provision is applied, and that's evident in the right-hand table. And you can see all the way through that, with an increase in site area, there is also an increase in floor space achievable. Next slide. Just want to also refer to our landscaping table, or the comparison of landscaping tables. So on the left-hand table, you can see our current development control plan control for landscaping for single dwelling houses. And in the right-hand table, the state policy for landscaping, for dwelling house and the landscaping provision. And in all instances, council's control is greater than the complying development state government control. And as I've mentioned and has previously been mentioned, that the left-hand table is the control that we're proposing to move from our development control plan into the local environmental plan. Next slide. So just running through an example of how those controls apply and what difference they result in. So this is a development that was done under complying development on a 650 square metre site with a under our local environmental current controls, 2012 controls, it would enable a maximum floor space ratio of 279 square metres. Under the state policy, the housing code, 335 square metres was achievable. In this instance, they actually proposed 312, and that's what was approved under the complying development certificate. Under our development control plan and the draft local environmental plan, 266 square metres of landscaped area would be required. Under the code, only 195 square metres was required, and they actually provided in excess of that and only just under what our own controls required. So they provided 255. So you can see that the floor space differences between what the state government code and what we're proposing in the draft LEP is compared to what our current floor space control is significantly greater, in the order of, in this case, 60 square metres or so. And in the landscaping, you can see that under the code SEP, significantly less landscaping is required. However, we're proposing to retain our current controls in that respect. And just to say that we have done some testing of this to ensure that with that floor space achievable under the code SEP, that our landscaping controls can also be achieved, albeit with potentially an increase in upper level development, so the two-storey part of the development, to enable that landscaping at ground floor. Next slide, please. So I just want to move on to the dual occupancy, and so the various types of dual occupancy, starting from the top left-hand corner, is attached side by side. Top right is attached one above the other. Bottom left, detached, both with a street frontage, in that instance a corner street, and bottom right, detached battle axe formation. And under the code SEP, the changes that occurred in the middle of last year enabled dual occupancy to be done as a complying development certificate approval without with the exception of the battle axe formation, that form at the bottom right. And you can see that that form is an intrusion into backyard zones, takes up a lot of opportunity for that private open space area, intrusion into neighbours' private open space areas through bulk, through overlooking, through privacy, and removes that opportunity also for decent canopy tree planting. And we do have under our local strategic planning statement and our Green City Plan, an objective of increasing our canopy cover from 36 to 40% by 2036 in order to address that urban heat effect and to improve our biodiversity of our area. So similar to the CODESEP, we also are removing or propose under the draft LEP to prohibit that form of dual occupancy, that battle axe form. Next slide, please. This is to show how the gross floor area controls for dual occupancy are calculated under the CODESEP and what we would be proposing under our draft LEP as well. However, with the landscape controls, as I've said, we're not adopting the CODESEP requirement, and we are actually changing the control to align with our dwelling house control. We see that dual occupancy is permissible in the same areas that dwelling houses are, and so really should be providing that same landscape contribution. And so that is actually increasing the landscaping control from what has applied as 35% for dual occupancy under our current standards. The other change is that under the CODESEP, subdivision of dual occupancy can occur immediately. Under Local Environmental Plan 2012, our current instrument, it requires 5 years until 5 years after completion of the dual occupancy before subdivision can occur. And again, we're looking to align with the CODESEP. Next slide. So just running through an example of that, we're not proposing to change the minimum site area for dual occupancy. So attached dual occupancy minimum site area of 700 square metres and detached minimum of 900 square metres. This example was attached side by side with a minimum site area of 730 square metres. And that enabled, under the Local Environmental Plan, a floor space ratio of 292 square metres. That's exactly what was proposed and approved. Under the CODESEP, it would have enabled a floor space ratio, of 482 square metres. So you can see a significant increase in floor space achievable. And if that site was proposing dual occupancy today, that could be approved under a complying development certificate without reference to council at 482 square metres. So a significant increase in floor space is already achievable under the state government policies, and that's what we're proposing to align with under that draft LEP. Again, as I mentioned, with the exception of the landscape provision. So under this application and under our current DCP, a landscape provision of 255 square metres was required. In fact, 311 square metres was provided. Under the CODESEP, 265. So in fact, a little bit more than our own DCP. However, under our proposed draft LEP provision for landscaping, that one that we're saying now we'd be aligning with our dwelling house landscape provision, 308 square metres would be required. Next slide, please. Just moving on to manor houses, and I've really run through this, just that we're proposing to increase or impose a minimum site area for manor house development of 1,100 square metres. Next slide. And affordable housing. So current control for new residential flat development or shop top housing development requires 4% of the residential floor space to be provided as affordable housing, and that's provided on top of the permissible floor space for the area, for the site. Under our local strategic planning statement, there was a commitment to increase that to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. To bring these changes about takes time, as we see, and we've obviously passed that 2021 deadline, so we're going straight to 10%. And that's what's proposed in the draft LEP. A 10% affordable housing, 10% of the residential floor space. However, that's to be provided within the permissible floor space. We see that the permissible floor space is achieved by assessing what form and scale of development is appropriate. And if you add on additional floor space to that, then that scale that was originally assessed against is not achieved. As Chris mentioned, we've got a feasibility report that will be available in conjunction with the exhibition. And in this instance, in the Penshurst Street instance, doesn't recommend or doesn't indicate that the 10% of feasibility is achievable or is feasible for those sites. We're interested in your feedback on that. We see the importance of provision of affordable housing. We've proposed an across the board 10% affordable housing requirement. However, we acknowledge that the feasibility may not be there, and we're interested in your feedback on that. Next slide, please. Just to run through the development control plan, and it's in 12 separate parts as listed there. Next slide, please. And the main or the changes to the development control plan are really to try and make it a more user-friendly document, to try and group things together into the type of development that you're proposing, and to make it easier to negotiate the document. So if you were proposing a residential development, you'd primarily go to Part B of the document, or Part C if you're in the environmental living zone. It divides it into minor and major, minor being that low density dwelling, single dwelling or dual occupancy, secondary dwelling forms, and major being residential flat development, shop top housing development. As I've mentioned, with the exception of landscaping, in the R2 zone, not in the conservation area or the environmental living zones, but in the R2 zone where complying development is achievable, we're seeking to align with those complying development provisions, with the exception of landscaping. In the C4 zone, that environmental living zone, we are specifying the requirement for additional documentation where it's adjoining bushland or places of potential Aboriginal significance. They're the sorts of documents that we'd be asking for anyway, but it's just making it clear in the development control plan that that's what we'll be requiring to be submitted. And similarly, the landscaping controls are in the local environmental plan. For our heritage conservation areas, we are seeking to strengthen components of it. In particular around demolition, not that the way applications for demolition of buildings that contribute to the heritage significance of the conservation area aren't currently assessed in a stringent manner. They are, but it's really just identifying what, if you really believe you're contributing dwelling in a conservation area should be demolished. It's what you're going to need to do to demonstrate, what documents you'll need to demonstrate that that it's worthy of demolition. And that's really has to do with firstly, its contribution to the heritage significance of the area, and secondly, its structural stability, and so things such as structural engineers' reports. So it is just back if we could, sorry. Thank you. So it is about just being explicit about the sort of information we'll be looking for there. We've also incorporated semi-detached development controls into the DCP, something that's been lacking up until now, and just reinforcing in the heritage component the importance of the external fabric and streetscape character. And for shop top housing and residential flat development, we're generally looking to align with the apartment design guide, and where the apartment design guide doesn't incorporate provisions and our existing provisions do, we'll be keeping those existing provisions. Next slide. And if you were to go to our DCP in respect to development in the local centre, including Penshurst Street, or then it would be Part B for the shop top housing component, Part D for the commercial component. And as Chris mentioned, going to that Part L, which would take precedence over the other areas in respect to the place-based controls stemming from our local centre strategy. Other parts of the DCP that you may need to refer to are the transport and parking management, where, as has been mentioned, a travel demand management approach is being taken, where you're in close proximity to good public transport networks. It's trying to reduce that parking provision, to discourage car ownership, to prevent the congestion on our roads, and to encourage people out of their vehicle and into active and public transport. In respect to vegetation management, Council brought about changes to that in 2020, and there's minimal further change. Water management, again, changes in 2019, and only minor changes to that section just to clarify some of the provisions. And our building sustainability section was adopted in 2020 in its current form, and there's no further changes proposed there. Next slide, thanks. And so now we're over to questions, and I think Norma and Chris and perhaps myself might be able to help with those.
Thanks very much, Ian. Particularly from home and you're not feeling particularly well. Thank you for participating and supporting us tonight. Now, Jane, you've been monitoring some of the questions. I don't think we've got very many tonight, which might be an indication that people might be wanting to watch the webinar later and submit questions, just freestyle, if you like, later on in the week. But you've got a question about street trees, I think, is one of the first questions.
Yes, Norma, thanks. We had a question earlier today from Dave, who asked, what are the proceedings with regards to council trees and how the council is going to make sure they're in good health? He has had a particular issue with trees dropping branches on his car.
Not good. Well, I can advise Dave that Council is currently working on a street tree asset register right now, which will give every individual tree in Willoughby local government area its own asset number. And there are over 40,000 street trees in Willoughby, so that's a big job. Once this is running, there'll be information about every tree to be found against that asset number, and information to do with its species, its height, its past pruning events, its branch failure history, if you like, and all sorts of reminders to do with inspections and work needed on trees will be included in that register. So having this information easily accessible in one place will really help Council in its job to maintain good quality street trees. So that's, I think, a really good initiative that's starting and occurring right now. So thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Norma. Another question from Anthony. Anthony's asked, could you please provide an indication of any bonus, either FSR and height, that would be provided via the design excellence policy in the Penshurst Street Centre?
So in regards to this question, there is no bonus incentive if a development application was to show design excellence. The maximum heights and the maximum FSR is indicated in the Willoughby Local Environmental Plan, as I discussed earlier. I understand where the question may come from, because some councils in their proposed LEP do have bonus incentives if design excellence can be achieved. For example, I know Parramatta Council is exploring with their design excellence policy bonus FSR and heights if a certain development can achieve design excellence from that review. But really, our design excellence policy for buildings between 12 metres and 35 metres is really to provide advice to both the applicant and council with regards to whether a development meets design excellence for the local centre, and any other improvements or changes that may be needed for development to achieve design excellence, but it doesn't provide that bonus incentive.
I guess I just jump in and say that's probably for a couple of reasons. One of them being, well, firstly, that we want to see design excellence no matter what, but also that bulk and scale that I was mentioning about the affordable housing, we don't want to add on to what we've assessed as an appropriate bulk and scale, and to provide additional floor space on top of as an incentive is not what we're seeking to do, I guess.
Great, thanks for that addition, Ian. Jane, have we got any more questions from tonight's Q&A?
That concludes all the questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you. So I think it just remains for me to say that, to remind you of the next steps and to tell you about the situation currently, which is that the draft documentation is on exhibition for 12 weeks, as I said earlier. So the exhibition ends on the 7th of June. And we're having these series of webinars, which will all be available the following day. And now there's quite a number accumulated on the website for all the other local webinars we've conducted already. So they're all visible and listenable to later on at your leisure. But it does give an opportunity to ask questions at the webinar, but it doesn't limit your questioning post-webinar. So we'll still expect your questions to come in afterwards. And the feedback that we've had today will be included in a feedback report. We're having an independent feedback report prepared to advise council as to the nature of feedback and the quantum and the tone of feedback we've had on this exhibition. And we'll report to council around about October, we imagine, on those findings. Then it will be a matter of establishing whether or not changes need to be made to the draft documentation as a result of what you've told us. And if that's the case and it's significant, we may have to re-exhibit the draft documentation again. And that would happen towards the end of this year. If the changes are not significant and the plan can look towards being made more quickly, we can send the matter to the Department of Planning and see if they will make the plan this year. But more likely, we'll be looking at a second exhibition, is our feeling, with the making of the plan next year. So we're expecting conclusion of the work in 2023. And then the hard work begins of actually implementing the new documentation and the new statutory plan. So for this evening, thank you very much for your attendance online. We've enjoyed the small amount of questions that we've been asked and the comments we've received. I hope you've found this webinar interesting and informative. And until the next one, which is on Thursday, it's good night from all of us here in the strategic planning team. Thanks for all the support we've had in the chamber. Good night.